Now live. Good morning. Welcome. Thank you for joining. Thank you for watching. And again, I'm grateful for those who are watching either live on Twitch or those who watch later on YouTube. Uh, I'm I'm just encouraged by the view numbers and some of the engagement I get outside of comments and things. Just people uh, messaging me on DMs or whatever. So I'm thankful for that encouragement, and just hope to continue to be a blessing and a voice in this world that tries to offer something other than what you may be seeing out there on a regular basis, and something that's positive, right? And actually, what I'm trying to do here is mirror Jesus's own ministry, and I think today's story and account for us, and the seventh sign that John records here in his gospel falls in line with what I want to do, right? And how I want to emulate Jesus. And so to start, I want to look at John chapter 1, verse 4. John chapter 1, verse 4 says, "In him was life, and the life was the light of men. And the light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overpowered it." That's we're trying to be out here on Twitch or YouTube, whatever, just out there in socials, just be life and light. And it's part of John's purpose statement. We've been looking at what he's trying to accomplish here in this gospel, what he's trying to teach, what he's trying to communicate. And the big goal is that Jesus is the Son of God and that Jesus is the King of Israel. But along the way, he's also been uh, focusing on these other points, and we saw it in yesterday's story in John chapter 9 with the man who was born blind. We saw it more, and we're going to see it more today. And when we transition to looking at the I am statements, we'll see it even clearer. What John's purpose was, his gospel, in terms of uh, looking at Jesus himself and what he represented, right? Not just him being Son of God and King of Israel, but also like what we see here in verse 4, him being life and light. Okay, and so if you remember in yesterday's account, if you had a chance to check it out, if not, encourage you to go and look on YouTube, or it'll be posted for a longer period of time than on Twitch. But he tells his disciples that darkness is coming, right? The hour of darkness is coming, and that while there's light, we have to do the work that we're allowed to do while it's still day. And I believe, and others agree with me, that Jesus is talking about the time where he's going to be crucified, and that was the only time period where we read about darkness being over the land, and there was an inability to work at that point, right? And so in that passage in John chapter 9, he opens this man's eyes. And if you can imagine what it's like to be blind, he was blind from birth, to then open his eyes for the first time. I mean, what you're opening your eyes to is light, right? Everything that we see, everything that we interpret, we perceive, talk about perceptions yesterday, is brought to us by light. Even the colors that we see, I talked about it last night, how I have, like, on the gaming session, about how I have a color deficiency, right? So when my eyes receive light, uh, you know, light is white, has the broad spectrum of colors, is everything in it. But my eyes, the cones and rods and everything else, they don't perceive every color clearly. I don't see reds and greens so well if they're mixed together, right? So then, like, colors in between, like orange and yellow, they kind of get lost to me. Sometimes I see a color and I think, yeah, that's orange, but my family would be like, no, that's yellow. Or I'll look at a color and I'll say, oh, that's pink, right? And like, no, that's purple. And so there's something in my eyes that's just not quite seeing everything that the light is offering, right? Because the light is offering the wide range of colors, but for some reason I can't see them all. And if you can imagine being born blind, or if you know anyone who is blind, or maybe you are blind and you're listening to this, I don't know how much light you can see. Is it like complete darkness? Is it just like, because when I close my eyes now, I can kind of, you know, I see like a kind of a reddish color. So there, I know there's light, like so if I was sleeping and it was like this, I'm like, wow, it's bright. What's that light? So I know that there's light there. Do blind people even know that there's light exists? Lots of questions. Okay. Uh, and so this man was born blind. What comprehension does he have of light? Like, what does he understand about light? I don't know. But what he does know, uh, and what I do read, is that he is confronted by light, the personification of light, right? Like we see here in John chapter 1, verse 4. In him was life, and the life was the light of men, and the light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overpowered it. And so I think about that literally, like how the light shines into his darkness and his eyes are opened and he sees now the truth, and he sees Jesus and Jesus tells him he's the Son of Man, and he worships. And so now light has been introduced to him. And here in we're looking at today in John chapter 11 is the first part of this, for actually a combination of both, and that's the idea that in him was life also, not just light but also life. So we're going to go ahead and read, as I always like to do. Tradition I was raised in, we always like to read the scriptures out loud when we were teaching. That way we can focus on what the scriptures tell us, not just what people have to say about them, right? So John chapter 11, starting in verse 1. Now a man named Lazarus was sick. He was from Bethany, the village of Miriam and her sister Martha. Now you may be familiar with Miriam as being Mary. If you've been watching, you know that I like to use the Tree of Life version, and so they tend to stick with the more Jewish spellings, so the Hebrew spellings of names and things like that. So that's why they go with Miriam here, because that's more likely what she would have been called, not Mary. This is the same Miriam who anointed the master with perfume and wiped his feet with her hair. It was also her brother Lazarus who was sick. Now, a couple of notes here. Lazarus in Hebrew, this is from the uh, commentary that I've been referring to, the Jewish Gospel of Jesus. Uh, and he says that Lazarus in Hebrew is Eliezer. So it's interesting that the Tree of Life version used the name Lazarus, but they went ahead and did that. But his name actually in Hebrew is Eliezer, which means God will help. Right? Just a little tidbit there is kind of interesting. What's also interesting here, we've been talking about the authorship of this gospel. According to Eli um, Eisenberg here with the Jewish Gospel of John commentary, he believed in an earlier authorship, which does present some issues here with verse 2. Okay, that this is Miriam who anointed the master perfume. That story is recorded for us in the Gospel of Luke. So if we take an earlier, now is it also? Now I'm curious. Is it also in Matthew? I don't think it's in Matthew. That's why I said that. Yeah, right. So Bethany, the town of Bethany, is mentioned in Mark, but the story about Mary anointing Jesus, sorry, not Mary, Martha. Now I'm talking about both the same Miriam. So it's the same Mary. So it was the Mary who anointed him with the perfume on her feet. That story is recorded for us in Luke. So if we take an early authorship of John, then the question becomes, well, where did John get this story? Okay, but not just where does John get the story, why does he refer to this way? When he says this was the same Mary who anointed the master with perfume and wiped his feet, it sounds like he's referring to the fact that the story is already known. So is this story known because Luke was already written and then shared, which then would point to the later date of authorship for the Gospel of John, or does it maybe reflect the fact that the story was well known already, like because it was orally communicated, people already knew about Mary, and of course, like with this Lazarus story, as we look at this passage, Lazarus story became extremely popular in the region because a man is raised from the dead. Spoiler alert! If you didn't know that, that's what's going to happen here. But and again, if you remember the importance of an early date to Eli Lazarus Eisenberg is his uh, his position that this gospel was not written simply with high Christology in mind, simply with the idea of trying to prove that Jesus is God, but with the idea that that it was written for Samaritan Jews and it was something for them to be able to relate to in terms of storytelling and gospel telling. Because so far you just have Mark and Matthew, and those were um, gospels that kind of appealed more to the Judeans, and so that's the only reason why the date of authorship comes into question here. Now, Eisenberg solves this issue by saying, yes, this was probably an orally communicated story. It was well known, people knew about it, and so the way he wrote about it here in verse 2, he said this was the same Miriam. He's just talking to his reader who would have heard the story and been like, oh yeah, I remember that. Others will point to, hey, this was written after Luke, and so Luke's gospel has this recorded, and he's referring to Luke's gospel, and they would point to the later date of authorship. Uh, my point there is like with all this, like I don't know. I've just been presenting this viewpoint from Eisenberg's viewpoint for this study. It's interesting, but it highlights like the power of bias. Like if you believe in one, you're going to believe in the next explanation. And so, if you believe in early authorship, you say, "Oh, it was something that was known." If you believe in later authorship, no, he got it from Luke. There's no way to really know, right? There's no way to really know. The main point is though that this is that Mary, and John does share this story. He shares it in chapter 12, the story of Mary anointing the master's feet with perfume. He does share that account in John chapter 12. It's just interesting that he is trying to help the reader identify with the people in this story this way by referring to something that became well known, whether through Luke's gospel or just by word of mouth. Okay. So getting back to the reading here, verse 3. So the sisters sent word to Yeshua saying, Master, the one you love is sick. When Yeshua heard this, he said, the sickness will not end in death, for it is God's glory that Ben Elohim may be glorified through it. Ben Elohim means the Son of God. So it's for God's glory that Ben Elohim may be glorified through it. Now Yeshua loved Martha. I was going to say something, but I was going to. Now Yeshua loved Martha and her sister Lazarus. However, when he heard that Lazarus was sick, he stayed where he was for 2 more days. Okay. Now, many have noted that in the timing, based on the fact that when he gets there, they say he's dead for 4 days, and so on and so forth, that it's most likely that while the messenger was on his way to Yeshua, uh, Lazarus had died. So by the time that Jesus even gets the message that Lazarus is sick, that he had already died. Okay, so the math does work out and supports that idea. But despite that, he still stays for 2 more days where he was. He doesn't go up to Lazarus right away. Now there's some cultural explanation as to why that's important. And we'll look at that in a moment. It says in verse 7, Then after this he said to his disciples, let's go to Judea again. Rabbi, the disciples are saying to him, you just now the Judean leaders are trying to stone you, and you're going back there again. Now again, in your Bible, in verse 8, it might say the Jews are trying to kill you. The Jews are trying to stone you. Uh, the Tree Life version does a better job of translating this to the Judean leaders, right? If you remember our discussion about who this is written to and trying to distinguish between those who rejected Jesus, his own, in John chapter 1, that he was, remember, he says that he was rejected by his own. I think it's verse 11 of chapter 1. Um, and then those who do believe in him, and John's always using that distinction in his writing, and a lot of translations nowadays will write in the word Jews, which is too far of an encompassing word. It includes too many people, and so Judean leaders is a better translation there. Uh, and so in verse 9, Yeshua answered, "Aren't there 12 hours in the day? If a man walks in the day, he doesn't stumble because he sees the light of the world. But if a man should walk around at night, he stumbles because the light is not in him." Okay, interesting answer proposed by Jesus. But if we remember what we just read about this whole concept of light and day and light and life, Jesus is kind of alluding to this fact about what it means to really walk in the light, and he's using the concepts of day and night to help us understand the two. Uh, and he's trying to explain to them, okay, very clearly that Lazarus is in a dark place and that he needs light so that he can see again. Okay. And he explains that here in verse 11 and 12. He says, after he said this, he tells them, our friend Lazarus has fallen asleep. Now, translators and in looking at exegesis says that actually a better phrase for that is like in a coma, but I'm going to go there to wake him up. So it's not a euphemism for death, or it is a euphemism for death, but the way the disciples are hearing it is that he's in like a really deep coma. And so in verse 12, the disciple said to him, Master, if he's fallen asleep, he will get better. So they're kind of, it's like there's like this play on words, like if he's fallen into a coma, maybe he'll get better. Now, Yeshua had spoken about his death, but they thought they were talking about ordinary sleep. So the commentator there is just interjecting with some clarification as to why there's some confusion between what everyone's saying. And in verse 14, Yeshua tells him clearly, Lazarus is dead. All right, guys, he's dead. Going back to verse 10 and 11, this whole concept of walking in the day, walking in the night, he was alluding to this fact already. And so it says, verse 15, I'm glad for your sake I wasn't there so that you may believe. Anyway, let's go to him. It's interesting because it seems like they already believe, right? They've seen some in John's gospel alone. They've already seen six signs that help them to understand he's the Son of God and that he is the King of Israel, and that they believe in him, right? They believe in who he is, and at the end of chapter 6 and 7, when he has this very difficult conversation about his flesh and I'm the bread of life and everything else, which we will look at when we do the IMs next week, or probably starting this week. He says like, "Aren't you going to leave me too?" And their response is like, "Where else are we going to go?" So they believe, but what is it about this specific miracle that's going to add to this knowledge and truth? I was going to say mythos, like this character of who Yeshua is playing, like who he is as a son of God. Well, that's where the cultural knowledge about the context, historical context here, is going to help us understand why it's important that he waited these days before he went, because he was going to prove something to them. It's quite extraordinary. So in verse 16, Thomas, called the twin, said to the disciple, let us go too so we could die with him. So when Yeshua arrived, he discovered that Lazarus had been in the tomb already for 4 days. There we go, the 4 days. Now, this is something that can be passed over by those of us who are outside of the Jewish culture, especially if we're not familiar with what's known as temple era, the second temple era culture. Now, at this time, when Jesus was there, they had this this ritual and this system set up to make sure that they didn't accidentally bury someone who was alive. Okay, and there are a lot of cultures that have this kind of built-in safety net to make sure that they didn't bury people who were just kind of like, they died somehow, but they or it seemed like they were dead, but they didn't actually die. And the Irish have wakes. A lot of cultures have wakes where where they go out and they have the body there and in a pub or something, and they're drinking and they're singing and they're partying. And the idea is like if the guy just fell asleep, we can wake him up and then he'd be okay, right? Because we don't want to bury people that maybe they did fall into coma. Maybe we don't really know if they're dead or not. Now in like Western culture, people get embalmed. It's like boom, you're done, right? We're not gonna worry about the person not really being dead. And in the Jewish culture, they believe that the spirit of somebody. And this is from Eisenberg's commentary, and other Jewish commentaries also explain this. Messianic commentaries explain this aspect, that they believe that the soul of a person kind of hovered around for about 3 days, And so, if there was a chance he was alive, then they would wait before putting them into their tomb. Okay, they would wait. And so the fact that John tells us that it's been 4 days tells us um, that he's already been dead and he's been put away in his tomb. And what's interesting is they had this two-part burial thing where they put someone in a tomb and they waited for the body to decay and they waited for the flesh to be gone and everything else, basically just for bones to be left. Then they would open up the tomb after a certain amount of time where they know that would happen. Then they would take the bones, put them in a box called an ossuary, and bury those bones in a box, and then they would put that into a family tomb. Right. So how this culture started, or this just tradition started, maybe points back to the days of Joseph. If you remember when Joseph died in Egypt, and he asked that to be made, he wanted to make sure that his bones would not be left there, and how they then took his bones and went back and buried it back with his family. Perhaps that's where it started, but this is the tradition. So where Lazarus had been placed was a place where they had given up on the idea that he was maybe alive. They figured he was dead, and they were sure, I should say, that he was dead, and so they put him in the next place, the place of decay. Okay, and that's where he was now for 4 days. Now, in verse 18, it says, Bethany was less than 2 miles from Jerusalem, and many of the Judeans had come to Martha and Miriam to console them about their brother. Now, if you notice here, the use of the word Judeans, that's referring to that subsection of Jewish people who are identified as being the people who rejected Jesus, right? That Jesus came to his own, they did not receive him. Right. In my CSB version, it says in verse 19, that many of the Jews had come to Martha and Mary, and that's very misleading, right? It should be the Judeans. It's that subsection of group that the Judean leadership is part of. Okay, the ones who eventually conspired to and plot, or they've already started this plot, but those who get it done, the killing of Jesus. Excuse me. Now, many of those Judeans came there, so they're there. And so, what's really interesting about this specific miracle is that it's not happening on a Sabbath, so it's not going to cause a lot of controversy in that sense. It's happening, but it is happening in view of the people who are known to the reader to be the ones who reject Jesus as the Son of God and the King of Israel. Okay, so they're going to be part of the group that witness this miracle, and that's really important for John and for his gospel because he's been building up this case, and he wants the reader to understand the difference between them and those who reject him. And that is that it comes down to belief. It comes down to your choice, because the Judeans saw it too. It's not like the Judeans didn't get to see the miracles; they saw the miracles. What distinguishes between those who believe and follow is simply that those who believe the miracles. Right? It has nothing to do with the difference in culture, or like I'm a Samaritan Jew and you're Galilean Jew and you're Judean Jew. It has nothing to do with that. There's just one community, and we're the ones who believe him, and that's a big deal when you take a look at the purpose of the Gospel of John, especially if you take that early authorship view. It helps to focus us there. So verse 20, when Martha heard that Yeshua was coming, she went out to meet him, but Miriam sat in the house. Martha said to Yeshua, Master, if you had been there, my brother wouldn't have died. But I know, even now, whatever you may ask of God, he will give you. And Yeshua said to her, Your brother will rise again. And Martha said to him, I know he will rise again in the resurrection on the last day. And that's a reference to what we call the book of Daniel, Daniel chapter 12, verse 2, I believe, to the idea that the dead will rise. So they had this belief in that concept. And if you notice here, her complaint to Yeshua, if he just came earlier, and again, according to these commentaries, that's a reference to even after he died, like the idea of the time frame, that short time frame, the few days when the spirit hovers. And we've seen other resurrections in other parts of the gospel, and so it's certainly probably clear to everybody here that Jesus has this ability. There, I remember the one son uh, who had died, and there was the widow, and they were actually marching out with the son's body which means that he had just died, and so he was there, and so Jesus raises from the dead, and it's like that idea, and Elijah and Elisha raising people from the dead. The idea there is that the spirit was around the person, and so they were able to perform those miracles, while their soul was still hovering. And the commentators here make an allusion, or make this statement as an allusion to the idea that if he just came when his spirit was still around, you could have saved him. But now it's too late. He's already been buried. He's been there for 4 days. And Martha concedes, yeah, I know the resurrection, Daniel chapter 12. And Yeshua makes a claim, I am the resurrection of life. Now we're going to come back to this statement and what it means. We're going to move forward here. We're going to go ahead and read it. Yeshua said to her, I am the resurrection of life. Whoever believes in me, even if he dies, shall live. And whoever lives and believes in me shall never die. Do you believe this? She says to him, Yes, Lord. I believe that you are the Messiah, Ben Elohim, Son of God, who has come into the world. It reminds me again of John chapter 9, where Jesus is referring to himself as the Son of Man, and the guy makes a confession. And so here we have someone else making a confession as to their belief, important to the reader to see and understand. After she said this, she left and secretly told her sister Miriam, the teacher's here, and he's calling for you. As soon as Miriam heard, she quickly got up and was coming to him. And if you're not familiar with the idea of sitting Shiva, it's the Jewish concept and pattern for mourning. Now I've been away from my video, and I just realized that I lost my video feed here. Apologize for that. But so sitting Shiva is this time frame where after the death of somebody, people sit together, the family sit together, while neighbors come in and they mourn with you, right? And so that's why it says that she was sitting there, and then she got up because she heard that the Messiah was there. And so if you can kind of picture, like, everybody's in a house together, and they're sitting with her and they're mourning with her because of what just happened, um, and then they see her get up and they're like, what is going on here? Where is she going? They thought she was going back to the tomb to mourn again, right? That's what the verse tells us. They think about. I keep losing feed there with my cam link. But let's get back to the scripture. So it says, verse 29, as soon as Miriam heard, oh, yep, I just realized I might have lost my microphone. I think I'm back on. So I was just saying, so back on verse 29, as soon as Miriam heard, verse 29, she quickly got up and was coming to him. Now, Yeshua had not yet come into the village, but he was still in the place where Martha had met him. The Judeans who were with Miriam in the house and comforting her, seeing how quickly she got up, went out and followed her. They thought she was going to the tomb to weep there. So when Miriam came to where Yeshua was, she saw him and fell at his feet, saying to him, Master, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. Repeating the same thing that her sister said, and so I think it's kind of clear. This was their mindset. Like, man, if Jesus had just come on time, even if he came after he died, he could have helped. But it's too late now. It's just too late. When Yeshua saw her weeping and the Judeans who came with her weeping, he was deeply troubled in spirit and in himself agitated. If you notice again, the writer here points out the Judeans are part of this mourning process. I mean, they may have been people who didn't necessarily, understand or believe that Jesus was who he says he was, but they, um, despite all that, they still believed in community. And even if these were people who believed in Jesus and they didn't, Yeshua, whatever, we're going to come together, we're going to mourn together, and they're part of this crowd. And John wants us to make sure, wants the reader to make sure that we understand that he's including the Judeans in this group. Where have you laid? He was deeply troubled in spirit and himself agitated. In verse 34, where have you laid him? He asked. Come and see, master. And they tell him, Yeshua wept. So the Judeans said, see how he loved him. But some of them said, couldn't this one who opened the eyes of the blind have also kept this man from dying? It's really interesting that John includes that there, because again, he wants the reader to understand that yes, the Judeans and the leaders have been denying the messianic um, status of Jesus. They haven't been recognizing who he was. They've been, uh, pointing out the fact that he's been performing miracles on the Sabbath, and so that kind of excludes him from being seen as like truly the Messiah, because what Messiah is going to break the Sabbath kind of thing. But John is actually, by including them in the narrative here, he's trying to let us know that not all the Judeans felt the same way. That there were those who believed, um, and that there were those who did think of Jesus as being the Messiah. They understood his the miracles that had been performed, and they understood that they took place, and so um, the only controversy might have been about the Sabbath, but they still saw him as potentially uh, the Son of God based on what he's done. Give me a second as I try to fix video here. I apologize. Yeah, I'm not sure why the camera keeps shutting off. My theory now, because I'm feeling this thing, is that it's getting too warm, and that maybe that's shutting off the cam link uh, for a second. Now my green screen looks funny, but I am take a. You know what? I don't need to be perfect here. Let's focus on the scripture. So we're going to get back to the Jesus wept thing in a minute. That's going to be my mental health wrap up at the end. But so Yeshua, again deeply troubled within himself, comes to the tomb. It was a cave, and a stone was lying against it. And Yeshua says, roll away the stone. And Martha, the dead man's sister, said to him, Master, by this time he stinks. He's been dead for 4 days. Yeshua says to her, didn't I tell you that if you believed, you would see the glory of God? And so they rolled away the stone, and Yeshua lifted up his eyes and said, Father, I thank you that you have heard me. I knew that you would always hear me. Because of this crowd standing around, I said it, so they may believe that you sent me. And when he had said this, he cried out with a loud voice, Lazarus, come out. He who had been dead came out, wrapped in burial clothes, binding his hands and his feet with a cloth over his face. And Yeshua tells them, cut him loose and let him go. Now we're going to stop there, and I want you to picture this for me. Remember, in him was life and the light of men, right? In him was life and light. And here's like the ultimate image of darkness. It's death. With the blind man, we can imagine what it's like to close your eyes, to be blindfolded, to not be able to see light, to walk around. I remember when I was at a chapter camp after my freshman year of college, they did this activity where during a whole meal, certain people at our table were wearing blindfolds, and we had to like help them. Like I remember I was fortunate to be one of the people that could see, because I'm saying fortunate because I want to eat food, and you want to be able to see what you're eating, and yet I had people to to the right of me and to the left of me that were blind and were blindfolded, and I had to account for the person on my right. I remember, I just the distrust that was there was really interesting. Like the person on my right, uh, at first thought I was like telling them to eat like a piece of paper or something, or like I was gonna fool them into doing something they shouldn't do. That was gonna be embarrassing. It was very difficult for them to trust, because when you can't see and you're in that kind of darkness, um, life becomes this thing where how do you know what you know, right? Like someone can give you Someone could give you something that's cold and wet, and it could be ice cream. It could be something else. It could be like, let's say it's something soft and warm and mushy, and they tell you it's a it's a cookie, but how do you know it's not, or that's like microwave Play-Doh, but how do you know it's not dog poop, right? I don't know. I was just trying to think of something that seems like dog poop that could fool somebody, and that's why my mind went to warm Play-Doh. Uh, but there's a lot of inability to trust because you just can't see, right? You have to kind of build relationships with people. And so by the end of the meal, I told the person next to me, what you have is in a dessert. It's got gummy worms and ice cream. I forget what it's called. It's like got cookie crumbles in it. And she's like, okay. And she just dug right into it. She had no problem because the whole time during the meal, I was trustworthy. But here, so that's the man born blind. That's a certain kind of darkness, right? You're still living life though. It's a life that's defined by, having to trust people and other senses and things like that. Here you have someone who's completely, they're dead. They're in complete darkness and they're lost. They're lost to us. Like there's nothing we can do to help them come back. There's nothing we can do to help them live life again, right? Like if someone loses their life eyesight, not born blind, but you lose your eyesight, now you're in darkness. But we can try to help them and guide them back to life. Someone who's dead is dead. It's like, how do we help them get back to life? We can't. The only one that can is the one that life exists in, right? He is life, and John is it's this is like this big crescendo. Like this is like the big, um, beautiful build up in music and song to this final sign and this final miracle to show that Jesus is the Son of God, to show that He is the King of Israel, to show that He is going to unite all the peoples together. And that was my point in highlighting the fact that Judeans are there, Galilean Jews are there, Samaritan Jews, everybody at this point are going to be united by him. There's a prophecy in Ezekiel about that. Ezekiel chapter 37, verse 15. As you can see there, this image of a stick, and how it says, for Judah, for Bnei Israel, that's the children of Israel, joined with him. Oh, sorry, I skipped it. The word of Adonai came to me, saying, you, son of man, take one stick and write on it, for Judah, for Bnei Israel joined with him. That's the children of Israel. Then take another stick and write on it, for Joseph, the stick of Ephraim, and all the house of Israel joined with him. Join them one to another for yourself as one stick, so they may become one in your hand. Right? And you keep reading. It's a prophecy about how the Messiah is, and how God is going to bring the people together. The all the houses of Israel are going to come together. Right? It's not just the Judeans and the house of Judah that's going to be blessed. Right? And so that's the picture we have here in John chapter 11, with the fact that the Judeans are there and that everybody is now going to see this incredible miracle take place. And he calls forth, and there comes the one who is in complete darkness, right? Complete darkness comes out of his tomb into the light. And he needs his community to unwrap his face and unwrap his body from the tomb he just came out of, back to life and back to light. And I think that's what John is saying. Like he's showing his reader, hey, listen, this Messiah, this Son of God, this King of Israel, look at what he's done. I was there, and he's providing you. When you read the story, and you have all these details in here, and it says Mary and Martha. It points to an eyewitness. It points to somebody who was there, and they're sharing as many details as they can to for the reader to understand. Okay, this is someone who was there, right? So I can believe this account. Now, the story itself is unbelievable, right? Who among us who's watching this now has seen this kind of thing? My greatest prayer, my greatest desire to see a resurrection take place, because I still believe that He is the resurrection and life, and that's what I pray for and hope for, that I can see it happen one day. in this world, not like in heaven. I see it like, oh, cool, that actually happens. But actually, like while I'm alive, still on this earth, I want to see this miracle. But for an eyewitness of it to put the story forth, to tell us who was there, to have an account of it, it's like, so if someone who's reading this at that time when it was written, and they're saying, wow, so I can go to this area, I can go to Bethany, I can go find Mary, Martha, Lazarus, or I can go see other people who lived in that area, the Judeans, the Galileans, whoever, and ask them, like, did this really happen? It's like, yeah, yeah, we saw it. Did it happen the way it said? Yeah, we saw it. Like, that's exactly like what John is trying to do, is to unify the house of Israel together. And that unification became the early community, the church, the way, the messianic community that believed in Acts chapter 2, the ones that gathered together for the breaking of the bread and for prayer and for worship and apostles teaching. They got together uh, daily, and they lived together in this community, and they shared all their things, which I actually didn't know this about the Essenes. The Essenes were another group of Jewish believers there. So you had like the Pharisees and Sadducees, and the Essenes were another group, and it's actually the way they lived. I always thought of them as just being like politically, like kind of rebels and revolutionists. Like Barabbas was an Essene, that kind of thing. But I didn't really know much about, like, they were zealots, but I didn't know much about them in general. And this commentary kind of opened up to me this the Jewish Gospel of John. He talks about how their community reflects what the community looked like afterwards, and it's just like this idea that all the house of Israel came together united in their belief of this one Messiah. Like that's where it's going. And this was a seminal moment in that. Like all the other miracles have happened, it's been blowing up, slowly growing, slowly growing. The Samaritan Jews are the ones to believe first, right? They're the ones that saw the signs, and they were like, oh, the very first sign, the Cana, the turning water into wine. So they were the first ones. The Samaritan Jews were the first ones to join this group. The Judeans had a harder time because he was doing things on the Sabbath, and they had to struggle with that. But then you get to the man who's born blind, and that's where division started, where some of them was like, well, can a sinner do this? I mean, even if he's doing the Sabbath, can a sinner still have this kind of power? And then boom, you have this miracle happen, and you have John tell us how Lazarus raised from the dead, and this is the moment here then that galvanized the community towards belief, and it also is the moment that galvanized the the Judean leaders to death. Okay. Uh, and so it says, therefore, verse 43, many of the Judeans who'd come to Miriam and seen what Yeshua had done put their trust in him, right? I just read the scripture, it's there. I just made that point, but it's there. But some of them went to the Pharisees and told them what Yeshua had done. So the ruling Kohanim, that's the priesthood, and the Pharisees called a meeting of the Sanhedrin. What are we doing? They asked. This man is performing many signs. If we let him go on like this, everyone will believe in him. And the Romans will come and take away both our holy place and our nation. So they're worried about, if the people unite under a king, it's that's treason against Caesar, and so the Romans would come in and put the hammer down, right? And and then we're not going to be in charge anymore. Like it's our job to quell any kind of issues that come up. Someone rises up, try to establish themselves like separate from the Roman kingdoms, or the Romans were going to stop them. That's why Barabbas was there, being ready to be put to death, also because he was considered to be an insurrectionist, and so this is where that split happened. And so that this is the goal and the point of John's inclusion of this miracle, was for the reader to see that now the Judeans are in the fold. Now they're part of the group, that they also believe in him as the Son of God and as the King of Israel, the one who holds the two sticks together and is going to join. That's, if you're finished reading that passage in Ezekiel, it's about joining those two sticks together, putting them back together to be one. And so there we have John chapter 11 and the seventh sign. Now, going back to um, the portion where Jesus is there and he's grieving. He's grieving the death of his friend. He's grieving along with others. It says there in verse 33 that when Yeshua saw her weeping and the Judeans who came with her weeping, he was deeply troubled in his spirit and himself agitated. himself agitated. Here's a really good chance. Let's take a look at uh, what these words mean. I'm gonna actually I'm gonna so it's John 11:33. So I'm gonna go into my exegetical guide here, and since I highlighted it, it's there. And we're gonna look at the word by word breakdown of what it says. It's doing a search. So it says he was deeply moved in his spirit and troubled. So I'm going to click on that phrase. He was deeply moved. You can see the Greek word is here, and because I've zoomed in so much, I can't see. So I'm going to have to make this a little smaller for you watching, so we can read the entire. The sense, shake, to move or cause to move back and forth, to stir, trouble, troubling. Um, I think a lot of us can, or see the breakdown. These are the other times this word is used, and the other ways it was translated. And the verses and the references are also recorded down here for us. Predicator, Matthew and Luke and Galatians. You can see the uses there. But going back to the uses of this word in the Greek. Like I've said before, my wife is Russ, so it says upset, disturbed, troubled. Don't let your be troubled. This is, or in a couple chapters, we're going to see John use that phrase, stirred up, confusing, intimidated, terrified, troubled. This is the state that Jesus is in. He's disturbed, he's confused, he's agitated, he feels disorder. The reason why I want to bring this stuff up is, I know it's like really small for you trying to see that there, but the reason why I want to bring that up is because yesterday I talked about wrestling with God and having the struggles that we have and the pain and the suffering, and we talked about that more in the gaming session last night. And I just want to reiterate that it's not wrong to feel troubled. It's not wrong to feel agitated. Jesus himself is stirred up. He's moved. He's shaken. Right? We're looking at the different translations there. He's sad. He's hurt. He's troubled by he's seeing what's happening here, and he's God. Like he knows what's going to happen, and yet the emotions overwhelm him. And as multiple commentators say, in this story we have a full picture of what it means for him to be fully divine and fully human. And there's a large subset or section of our culture that wants to deny our humanity. They want to tell us that what we're feeling uh, is of no use, is inconsequential, doesn't matter. What only matters is that God matters, and God is who He is, and yet here, as we read this story, we see that for God Himself, it mattered. It matters both how He feels and what He knows. What He knows will lead Him to what He does, but how He feels, okay, is what motivates Him and moves Him to do what He does. He doesn't just raise Lazarus from the dead because He can. I'm God, I can do it. Yeah, why not? Boom. No, there's a connection He has with His creation. It's important to understand. And there's that same connection He has with you, with me. And I think part of what John is doing here is to show us how much He really cares about His own. Okay? Even the ones who eventually reject Him, He still cares. Judas is there. Like He still loves and cares deeply for us. And so if He can feel so deeply and allow then His feelings and emotions to lead to the actions that point to Him as being God, then I think that we as human beings who have the Spirit of God living in us must recognize those emotions when they come and use them to lead us to act on his behalf. Okay? Not to shut them down and not to shut others down too. When others are feeling what they're feeling, to tell them that they shouldn't be feeling what they're feeling is a complete waste of time. It's no good for anybody. People's feelings are powerful. They speak to that person on such a deep and intimate level that only they can know. And the most powerful thing you can do is to believe them when they tell you that they feel what they feel. And then to allow the Spirit of God to direct you in what you should do. You know, God looks up to heaven, Jesus looks up to heaven and he prays. And he allows the Spirit of God to then move through his prayer and he prays to the Father, and the Father answers by giving him the power, the authority to bring life out of darkness, complete darkness. And I think that that's just a really powerful picture of what we need to do when we have those emotions, we have those moments, is to look up to heaven and to pray and to ask the Spirit of God to direct us then what to do. Um, and so it can be done, right? There's not much else to say there, but that there is like, I've studied so much in this passage, and there's like so much you could share, but for the purposes of what we're doing here, kind of a broad view, I think, done plenty for today. I think as we do the gaming session tonight with Dasi, I'm going to probably focus more on the idea of life and darkness and bringing life out of darkness, and in more like counseling kind of terms, and see what a 7-year old, or maybe my wife, depends on who's in the mood today, has to say about the subject. All right. Again, as always, appreciate watching and sharing. Had some video issues earlier today, so hope that's not too much of a distraction. But hopefully, we'll see you later this evening at 6 p.m. Thanks for watching.